Good, let's begin, everyone. Good, so we are happy to have having you on board, Andre. I can hand this over to you. Fantastic. So, if we would be in a proper classroom environment, everybody would now clap their hands, yeah? So, that's going to happen in our minds now. Good.
Cool. Well, thank you for the intro, Olga. Thank you for the virtual clap, everyone. So, first of all, as Olga's just said, I'm Andre Ainsworth. I'm a food, drink and lifestyle photographer, and I'm going to tell you a bit about me and my career, and bringing you up hopefully to the present time now. I'm just going to bring up some images for you. Give me 1 second. So hopefully you should be able to see these. So basically, yeah, I started freelancing. I started shooting. Let me just stop a second. Sorry. I started shooting in the music industry 20 years ago. And I sort of fell into it by mistake. I moved down to London from Manchester when I was 17, 18 and started working in photo outlets, photo shops, places like Snappy Snaps. And from there, basically my lifestyle was clubbing and dancing, and basically that's what I did every weekend. And my sister was a journalist in London at the time, working for some music magazines, and she introduced me to a friend of hers, Phil Pepper, who basically took me under his wing, took me into a club and gave me a camera. And I think one of those first images I took that night stayed in my portfolio for 4 years. I remember when Phil first said to me, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "You know, why do you become a photographer?" At the time I was like, well, that's something that other people do. It's not something that I could do or I could achieve. And he basically said, "Don't be so stupid, of course you can." So a big thank you to Phil Pepper. He's now a lecturer down at Southampton University. So anyway, so basically from there, I started having a camera with me all the time. I had lots of friends who were promoters of clubs, of nightclubs and parties, and basically got into a lot of the venues to build a portfolio. And eventually, after about 3 years of doing that, I had a tap on the shoulder whilst I was in Heaven Club down in Charing Cross, which is still there to this day. And this guy who's a bit half cut turned around to me and said, "Would you like to come down to see DJ Magazine and show us your portfolio?" So I gave him my card, didn't think much of it, and a week later I had a phone call from Sam, who's the picture editor there at the time. So as I said to Sam on the phone, I said, "Look, I'd love to show you my portfolio, but most of it is house parties and a bit of club stuff." So went down anyway, and she obviously saw something in my work that she liked. And a week later, she gave me a phone call and asked me what I was doing on the Friday night. And it was that weekend, in fact. And she asked me to meet them down at Charing Cross train station, and they took us to a private airfield. And we got taken around by a private jet with Timo Maas, who was a big DJ back in the time. And we went around for 3 days, staying at hotels, going to different clubs, and documenting the weekend. I have to say it was quite a glamorous way to start my career, and I think those sort of jobs, as a lot of us know, are quite far and few between, but you enjoy them when they come along. So working in the music industry, these images here are from various clubs around the world. One of the things when I first started was my camera kit I was using was a Canon EOS 5, and I used to use a offshoot cord for the flash. So basically camera, flash here so I can move it around, and basically gave you a lot more control of the light. And I used to use a 20mm lens, so a very wide angle lens, which created my style from the offset. So going back to the music industry, so 20 years ago, started working in the clubs, and it was interesting. It was a lifestyle choice, definitely, and I got to do a lot of travelling, which was great, and it also taught me a lot about photographing people in odd scenarios, I suppose is one way to put it. But back in the day, as I was saying before, that I was using a Canon EOS 5, and we were using transparency then. So as a lot of you will know who've used transparency is very unforgiving, unlike digital, where you can you can pretty much mess up a photo very well and then shove it onto Photoshop and you can bring it back again, whereas with transparency you couldn't. So working in clubs with all the different lighting and everything else that you had to deal with, you had to get it right and you had to know what you were doing. I think a good example of a way to put that is that I used to go into a club. I had to give magazines between 20 and 40 images. So I knew that I could go into a club and take, if it was a good club, good night, I could take up to 2 rolls of film, shoot 2 rolls of film. So that's 64 images. No, it's not, 74 images. And out of those 74, I'd know I'd get between 20 and 40 images which were good enough for publications to use. Which I think in this day and age, and even going from my point of view when I used to do the corporate events, and digital cameras had come out, I'd find myself taking 500 shots in a night. And I'd be like, why am I doing this? It's actually creating more work for yourself, even though the images that you take on a digital camera don't physically cost you money, it does in time. And that's something always to bear in mind, is that time is money. And I think going back to using transparency in film, is that the way we used to work it out was one film cost 15 quid, because it'd be 15 quid for buying it and developing it. So literally every single picture you took cost you money, and that's the way we used to think. So working in the clubs, it was interesting, and like I say, you got to meet a lot of people, and you did a lot of travelling. It was more as a lifestyle choice than anything else, I think. It did pay the bills just. I think one of the things that when you're working with magazines, especially in the dance industry, there wasn't a huge amount of money there. So basically the magazines would tell you what you got paid, rather than when you're working privately, and you can choose what you charge in theory. So yeah. So basically, did the club stuff. Just to try and get back on track a little bit here.
These are really amazing pictures, Andre. Really, absolutely fantastic.
The imagery it's an interesting thing. I think working in clubs, it can be very hard. I used to watch other photographers and see how they would work. One of the ways that I always used to like to work, and still do if I occasionally do a party for somebody, is that I don't want people to know that I am there. And I think the only way that you can do that is by popping up and popping out again. I used to hold my camera down by my side and literally be dancing through the crowd, and I'd pick up the camera, pop a picture off, and then go again. And I think one of the best compliments I ever got from someone was someone came up to me after a club and went, "Mate, it was like you weren't even there." And like, to me, that's like the Holy Grail. It's amazing. So yeah, it teaches you a lot about capturing the moment, and I think that's something else which also helps in a lot of different genres of photography as well. And like all of this sort of stuff. The other thing is that people always used to say to me, "You're always so smiley." To which I was like, well, if I smile at you, you smile at me. So surely that creates a better picture. And I think that's something else to remember, that if you want to do the music stuff, you've got to be bubbly, you've got to smile. Because otherwise, if you don't, I used to watch people, other photographers in clubs, and they'd walk through a crowd, stop people, bunch them together, wouldn't even smile at them, and then take a picture and walk off. And it'd be a bit like, what are you doing? So yeah, smile a lot. And I think, that goes through every different genre of photography, including, if you're working in a studio. At the end of the day, you're working with a team of people. And if you're happy and hopefully bubbly, then that comes off with the rest of the team. And I think when people are happy, they create the best work. So that's definitely something to remember. And also, if you're not happy doing what you do, stop doing it as well, I remember a friend of mine, Phil Pepper, who I mentioned before, just as I was going to do a big job, which was a private job in the industry, music industry, I phoned him up and I said to him, "Phil, do you still get nervous before going to a job?" And at this point, Phil had been doing it for 20 years. And I just remember him saying, "Andre, the moment you stop being nervous before you go to a job, stop doing what you're doing, because it means you don't care." And I think that's a huge lesson in the sense of it. And it's true, if you don't care about something that you're working on, you're not going to do the best work you can do, and you shouldn't be working in that industry. So, which I'll come on to that in a minute. So yeah, so basically all of these, one of the things with the working in the clubs is it teaches you about using light and using light with photography. So for example, this next image here, this is a really long exposure. So it's a long exposure with a flash. So it would be, I don't know, probably 6 seconds maybe on a tripod. And you move the lens around a little bit. And you can see that there's a guy in the middle of the image. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a guy in the middle where you can actually, he's frozen in time. And that comes from the flash at the very beginning of the shutter curtain going up. And that's something, another thing that we learned through doing the club photography. And again, capturing moments. So, and I think throughout my career in the music industry, one of the nice things, like we were all young, I was 19, 20, 21, that sort of age. And everybody I knew in the industry were also creating their own paths in whatever they were doing, whether it was PR in music or whatever else. And that actually helped me throughout my career because I grew up with all of those people who then moved into different paths as well, which helped me later on down in the career, if that makes sense. Again, these are more lighting pictures. And another thing that I found is that we did exhibitions where we would sell a lot of work because people would see this sort of thing and go, I want that on my wall. So we did quite a few exhibitions like that, selling prints. So this brings me to portraiture really. So working in the music industry for the magazines, for the first sort of couple of years I was just doing the club stuff. Through that I started meeting lots of DJs and lots of sort of named people in the industry who needed portraiture doing, along with the magazine started saying to me, you know, do you want to do some features? Which brought me on to learning how to do portrait photography. So at the time, again, I wasn't using studio lighting, we were out and about. Quite often I used to do a thing, an article every 2 weeks with a journalist where we would basically do a quick interview with a DJ. We'd go and meet him wherever he lived, and we would literally usually have 5 minutes to do the shots. And this is something which I think it made me learn very quickly about how to use the surroundings you have to create good portraiture. And actually, in the scheme of things, you can create good portraiture wherever you are. You can do it in your front room, you can do it in your back garden. You don't have to be somewhere which is absolutely beautiful. You just have to learn how to use your surroundings. And also the lighting as well. You know, how to use the natural light. And also, you know, I was using a little speed light, Canon speed light. And learning how to use those. It's amazing what you can actually do with those. So this basically brought me on to doing a lot of features, working for PR companies, and doing some studio stuff. At this point, I wasn't really doing a lot of studio stuff. I think I bought 2 Bowens lights, studio lights, off eBay for, I don't know, 300 quid, which at the time were probably 10 years old, and I've still got them in the studio to this day, and they are still working. So they must be now 30 years old, something like that. I'm a very big believer in you use what equipment you have. I got an email the other day from a student asking me some questions to help her with her thesis. And one of the questions she asked was, do you think it's important to use lots of different kinds of equipment? Or no, so do you think it's important to use lots of different kinds of cameras? To which my reply was, no, I think you should, depending on what you're doing, but as a photographer, you should know how a camera works and you should know your kit. You don't necessarily have to know every single camera out there. As long as you can use a camera to a point where you're churning out good work, then it's more to do with the person behind the camera than the equipment that you use. I have equipment, I don't have a huge amount of equipment in my studio, but I know how to use it and I know how to create good images from it. I have colleagues who I know who will go and spend 4, 5, 6 grand on a piece of equipment because it makes it 10 minutes quicker to do something. Which, in the scheme of things, if you can afford to do it and you have the money to do it, fine. if you don't need it. It's a nice to have, not a must have. So then started doing a lot more portraits, and this led me on to working for PR companies as well. And I think during this time, so in the music industry, I worked in the music industry for about 9 years. Towards the end of my music industry career, I started to not get as much club work and work in magazines. DJ magazine I used to work for, so they were a bi-weekly magazine, and I used to get on average 4 or 5 jobs every 2 weeks from them, and it got to a point where I wasn't getting any work from them. I was getting some of the portraiture work, but not the club stuff. And I phoned them up a few times, and something which I think a lot of people will realise as they go through their career with picture editors is picture editors don't like to necessarily tell you the truth. I've found that a few times in my career, where you stop getting work and you phone the picture editors up and you say, what's wrong? And they just fob you off with something. Anyway, eventually I said to this guy, why aren't I getting the work? And he just said, we don't think your work's very good anymore. To which, felt like someone just punched me very hard. And I said to him, I was like, mate, do me a favour, send me out to another club and let me try again. Because in my head it was like, well, this is my career, this is what I do. And at that point I was like, well, what am I going to do if I don't do this? So anyway, went to a club, and I remember...
Andre, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
When I used to do a lot of editorials, I found that your shelf life is, I mean, at least in my case, really often it was like 2 or 3 years. And, almost like 2 or 3 years, you were still like the new kid on the block, and people went like, wow, this is great. And they got something different. Well, and really often, as often in life, things sometimes just wear off. It's maybe not because the quality of your work, got much better or worse, basically. Really often it's just because they I don't know, like sometimes they just really tend to, want to work with someone new.
Fashions change, I think, as
Yeah.
well. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I think in hindsight, looking back at my career now and looking at that point, 2 things happened. One thing is digital cameras came out. The digital camera that I actually got at the time was a half-frame camera, and I was still using the same lenses. And if I look back at the images from after the digital and before, the difference is huge as well. So that's one of the things. But secondly is that time when I went back into the club that last time, and I remember I stood on the dance floor at 3 in the morning with my camera, and I was looking around just going, I don't want to be here. I don't have the passion for this kind of work anymore. And it was at that point, it was almost like a light bulb moment that I just went, right, it's a kick up the arse to figure out what I want to do. So, and I had to, it would always be photography, because photography is something that I love and it is my passion. But it was a case of what direction do I go in that? And I think it was quite a pivotal moment in my career to sort of figure that out. So from then, I basically, I started working for, well, first of all, I went back to the magazine and said, thank you for basically showing me that I don't want to do this anymore. And it was a bit of an odd moment for Ollie, who I actually know Ollie still, who was the picture editor at the time, because he was a bit like, well, thanks. But yeah, it basically said, I was like, thanks, I'm going to walk away and move into something else. And I was lucky that I'd been started working for PR companies and events companies, and also doing like corporate events, doing weddings, doing all that side of things, as you do. And so I had that sort of the money coming in from there, which was lucky. And so from there I started doing all this sort of stuff, which is my events. Now the events and the club stuff, there's a huge crossover there, and I think one of the things that I found quite weird in a way was that I was suddenly doing events work, which you get paid a hell of a lot more money for, but it's a hell of a lot easier than going into clubs, which can be an absolute pain, really. It's a lot of hard work. And you don't necessarily have a brief either. At least with doing corporate events, you have briefs. So I ended up doing events work. I did a bit of wedding work. I enjoyed it, but again, it's a lot of stress. I think some people really enjoy it, and it's the sort of stress they love. From my point of view, it wasn't. So I did a little bit of that. But then as I started doing the corporate stuff, I started falling into doing corporate events which were to do with drink and food.
I mean, it's really great how you were able to move over the style that you had acquired in the club scene over to events, because those are really unusual, really quite special. I think event photography, particularly like the one before. I mean, it's just amazing, really, how you managed to.
I think one of the things, yeah. Well, when I did the move, it wasn't like just bang and moving. It was a bit of a transition. But one of the things that I found, like going back to some of my portraiture here, I remember going to see quite a large PR company down in the West End, and I got introduced by somebody I knew from clubbing, who was I think she worked on the front desk, and she said, "Oh, come in and see my boss." And I went in and showed her my portfolio, which had all of this sort of portraiture in. And I met her and two of the people in the meeting, and they all turned around and said it's so nice to see a portfolio which isn't corporate. You know, it's not corporate headshots. It's not really cold in a office. So I actually ended up getting a lot of work because people saw all this sort of stuff, and also the event stuff, which had the crossover from the club. And weirdly, at the same time, I used to get a lot of wedding photography work because people would see my dance website and go, "Oh, can you come and do this at our wedding party?" Which I was like, "Yeah, fine." Again, enjoy doing that. So there is a big crossover, and I think there's a big crossover in lots of different genres of photography. And I think if you're clever with it, you pick bits that work and add those into each different genres. And I still do it to this day. You know, in my studio work, I'll think about lots of little bits will come together, and then you take a step back and you sort of go, "Oh yeah, I used to do that like many years ago," and I'm sure you do the same. So yeah, so then doing a lot of corporate. As I said, started doing lots of things like this is for the world's largest champagne tasting, or wine and champagne tasting, that happens every year then in London. And so this then sort of got me thinking, quite like food and drink. And at the time, I'd also done my first food shoot. I actually figured this out today. It was actually in 2005, but it didn't actually click at the time that this was something that I really like. At the time, I was all about people. All my photography was people photography. And I think if you'd have asked me at that point, "Oh, why don't you do food?" I'd be like, "Why would I want to do that?" You know. But again, as I think we're all on a journey, and I think you've got to embrace the journey. Hindsight is always a lovely thing, I think. So moving on from this, I started doing more stuff for the PR companies that looked after the restaurant chains, the hotels, did some interiors, that sort of thing, but I was never really into the interiors. But food, suddenly I was like, yeah, like this. I like the beauty of food. I think when you work with, at this point I was working with chefs, and I think, you know, it's like in any industry, there's some people you work with who are amazing, and then there's some people you work with who you'll go, "I'll never work with them again." But when you're working with people who are very passionate about what they do, I think that comes out in the work, as I said earlier. With the restaurants, I went through a period of shooting a lot of afternoon teas, which sounds really lovely, but my partner, who I've been with now for 20 years, used to say to me at weekends, "Let's go for an afternoon tea," and I'd be like, "Nah, not going anywhere near an afternoon tea." I used to bring doggy bags back with me from all my shoots to give to her, which she'd quite liked. But again, like, this is an afternoon tea shoot, and I always used to try and shoot them not in the traditional way, so you see the three tiers, and just to bring something a little bit different to the table. Then started doing a bit of drinks, and you know, this whole era of the food and drink, I don't think there was as many people doing food and drink photography then, because it was still quite specialised. It is quite specialised anyway, but there weren't as many people with cameras, I think, is what it boils down to. You know, you didn't have Instagram then, you didn't have Facebook then, I don't think. so it wasn't something which was widely known about. Whereas nowadays, you just need to open up Instagram and you've got every Tom, Dick and Harry is doing some sort of food photography, which isn't a bad thing. I think in some ways it's a good thing because it keeps you on your toes. And it's also interesting because, you see some of the work that comes out on Instagram and you go, yeah, I hadn't thought of that before. So it's a very, very good learning tool is Instagram. Same as Pinterest as well. Pinterest is very good for that. I'll come on to that later. So a lot of my food and drinks work around this era was, I did a mixture of studio lighting and natural lighting. Personally, I think that it's very important to be able to shoot natural light and to shoot studio lighting, because you never know what scenario, what situation you're going to find yourself in. I've had photographers turn around to me before now and say, oh no, well you have to use natural light for food photography because you can't create natural light with studio lighting, which is rubbish. With studio lighting you can create any sort of light. At the end of the day, the sun is a light. You can create that. There's nothing that you cannot create. And lighting is actually very simple, and I think a lot of the time people overcomplicate it and people get quite scared of using studio lighting. I think sometimes you've just got to take a step back and go, well, all studio lighting is light and shadow. And if you can,
well, I guess as a commissioned photographer, you need to be able just to pull off your signature style or your thing under any sort of circumstance. You can't just say like, sorry guys, when you've been booked for a job, you can't just say like, sorry guys, today wasn't the right lighting or the right weather. You need to come up with a style that you can replicate, I guess, no? Yeah, really interesting. So at that time, would you say that your lighting was 50% artificial, 50% natural lighting, or? I
would say it was mainly, I'd probably say 75–80% was studio light, because I was in dark restaurants. I was in lots of places where you didn't have nice big windows. Some of them did, and if you did, then you'd use that. But if not, then yeah, you just had to create the ambience. I've done shoots at restaurants where I've been stuck in a little back room, which is probably about 3 meters by 3 meters, with no windows. So you have to deal with what you have. And again, looking at that takes me back to one of my first days in the music industry when I was working with the DJs and having 5 minutes to do a portrait. You have to deal with it, and you have to make sure you can deal with a situation like that. And I think as one of the things that makes a good photographer is somebody that you can put a good photographer in any situation, and they will find a way to create a good image. And basically, no matter what genre of photography you work in, your clients will want somebody who is very versatile, and that's how you keep clients, basically. Always remember the client is always right, in theory. At least nod and smile anyway. So this basically is all the restaurant work that I've done. I had a style at the time, which you've probably seen here, is that it's at an angle. And I remember showing my portfolio to an agent at that time, and they said to me, "Your work is very 80s." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Oh, it's all at an angle. You need to stop doing the angle thing," which I found quite interesting, because all of my clients at the time liked me for my angles, of the angles that I did in my work, and they used to ask me to do that specifically. And I found it interesting that if I'd have stopped doing that, I wouldn't have got a lot of the work that I got. And I think something to bear in mind is that, looking at agents and also looking at your own work, you should make sure that you love your work. Listen to critique. You have to listen to critique, because it helps mould your future. But at the same time, if you really love an image and it's really what you love, the style, then go for it, because that's what you're going to really enjoy shooting. And I've mentored 3 or 4 photographers, and you've got to be quite brutal when you go through somebody's portfolio, because that is life. You know, when you show somebody a portfolio, depending on who it is, a lot of people just sit there and nod at it, especially potential clients. They'll sit there and nod at it and go, yeah, that's nice. And then they might phone you again if they like it. But if they don't like it, they don't care. They'll never phone you again. So you need to bear that in mind. So my style changed quite a lot throughout the years. And these are going back to, this is one of the last restaurant ones. So the other thing that helped me with the portraiture, working in the clubs and working for the magazines, was, again, it's capturing the moment. So like working with chefs and creating imagery which captures that moment, captures a bit of fun. People want that. They don't just want a chef stood there with a knife in their hand. So again, lighting wise, like the one before, this is all natural lighting. Actually no, it's not. There's a bit of fill light on this, so that is a bit of both, which is unusual for me. I usually will either use flash or I'll use natural. I don't tend to use both. That's just my style. Again, that's not saying that's right or wrong if you don't, but again, this is a guy called Burger Bear Tom. He is one of the most gentlest big giants that you'll ever meet, but at the same time one of the scariest guys you'll ever meet. He wouldn't hurt a fly, but again, he was very well known for his burgers. Yeah, so the portraiture, the lifestyle stuff, this then basically came into helping me working for the PR companies who wanted to show their clients off for media. And again, this is taking bits and pieces from the whole career really, which actually then led me on to working for brands and celebrities. And it helped me, I think, create images which are hopefully not, I know it's staged, but it has a bit of a nice feel about them. So the lifestyle work I really love, and I think lifestyle with food and drink, you have to really be able to do it, because you will always have clients who want you to do all three, food, drink and the lifestyle things. Quite often clients can be really good at suddenly going, oh, why don't we just do this, and throw a person in it. So yeah, you need to be very versatile. Versatility, as I said before, is something we all need to be. And so basically this basically brings me up to now and what I do with in my career now. I think one of the main differences is that when I was doing the restaurant work, you're working with a chef, which is great if you've got a chef that knows what they're doing, and also a chef that doesn't mind being asked to maybe change something in the dish, or some people don't like that because it's their baby. Whereas actually when you're doing food photography, the way that somebody puts a plate of food down to eat, to look beautiful in front of somebody, can be totally different to the way that you plate food to shoot. And some chefs get this, some chefs really don't get it. So you tend to, in my career, I've found that it's probably not always right, but quite often it's the little chefs, the small chefs who think they're amazing, and you start asking them to change things on their dishes, and they really don't like it. Whereas I've worked with some very big chefs, big high-end chefs, who they'll look at the plate, look at you, you'll sort of go, and they'll be like, no, it doesn't work. And it works really well. Which, again, so this brings me on to sort of now, so I then started testing a lot at home. I presume you probably all know what testing is. If you don't know what testing is, it's basically where a photographer will work with a team of people for their portfolios. The work can't be used for monetary purposes, so you can't then go, unless you're all agreed on it and you share the money, that you might sell an image to a magazine. But other than that, you might say use a brand, but you wouldn't be able to sell the image to a magazine, for example. So I started testing a lot with food stylists and prop stylists. When you first start testing, it's very hard to get the right team together, because you tend to find the people who, say the food stylists who are working food stylists, they will test, but they'll only test with people who are in the industry already. So if you're just starting out in the industry, your best way forward is to contact people like there's Salt and Spoon, which is a website, who they used to be called Hers Agency, but they've got a lot of different props and food stylists, prop and food stylists on there, who, if you email them, they'll basically tell you of assistants. Their assistants will be interested in testing. And that's how I first started. And I think it's really important, depending on what sort of photography or food photography you want to do, if you want to move out of the restaurant industry, then you have to work with food stylists, because a photographer, for one, will never have the time or the skill to be able to do what a food stylist would be able to do, or a prop stylist as well. Like I can prop and I can style to a point. I've just had a conversation with a potential client recently about, because obviously we've got this whole thing with COVID going on, and we can't bring people into the studio. So I've had a client recently who's a drinks client, basically asking me, the email basically said, do you have a studio? Do you have a studio at home, sorry? Do you live with a stylist? Except it went through all of these things, and I basically phoned up and said, right, I can style, but not as well as a stylist. I have a studio, yes. I can shoot, yes, that's fine. If you want to use me, it's not going to be a 2-day shoot, it'll be a 3-day shoot, because I have to do everything, and you're still going to have to pay for that. So, you know, definitely work with the right people. So it also changes, it changes the direction that you're going, and it also changes the strength of the imagery that you will get from it as well. So basically this brings me up to now, really. Currently I live in Tottenham and have a studio at home, which I'm very lucky to have, and I've got a good network of people that I work with. These again are all images which have been done for clients, whether they're large restaurants, or some of the larger restaurants will let you bring stylists in, and they've also got a bit more money, which helps as well. But I think one of the things that I'm finding at the moment is that I love doing the food, but the drinks, the drink photography that I do is something which I'm not even more passionate about, but I really enjoy it. I quite enjoy doing the design side of things. So quite often when you're brought in as a photographer, an agency will call you and go, right, we have a shoot. Here's the brief. The brief is already done. So you're not really involved in the very beginning of the shoot. One of the things, I suppose, you would call it the art direction, I suppose. And one of the things I actually really enjoyed doing is being involved in the very beginning of the shoot. Most of my work I have, not most of it, but a lot of the work I have on my website now is actually my test work that I've done. Because it's the work which is, for one, it's probably the strongest, because you are your own boss. You and your team of people who you're working with can create an image which is from the very, little scribbles on a piece of paper to the finished thing. So for example, this image here, we call this the perfect bite. And in this we had a prop stylist, we had a set designer, or a set stylist, and we had I had an assistant and also a food stylist as well. Like this shot probably took 4 hours to shoot, I would say, because we had to build the set, had to get the lighting right, etc., etc. But this is the sort of stuff which I get really passionate about now, because it's almost you're creating art, I suppose. I think all photography is an art, but this gives you just that little bit more to play with.
Yeah. Can we just really quickly just emphasize this point? It's just so incredibly important that you define your portfolio and your style, and should really create almost like your best work during tests. I mean, that's the moment when you're uncompromising, no one tells you what to do. Whereas a commission is always a compromise, right? It's between maybe you and the client, and then the art director, if an ad agency is involved, Whereas, if you can test and you put a good team together and they're all pulling exactly into the same direction, and you can be ruthless, you can be uncompromising, you can be edgy, basically, really.
I think
absolutely amazing,
One other thing about testing as well is that testing teaches you what is possible and what isn't possible. So it means that you can come up with ideas, and you can try and test things out, hence testing, in the studio. And do you know what? If it doesn't work, that's great. but then you know it doesn't work. So that when a client comes to you and goes, oh right, well we'd like to do this,
That's it.
you can go, yeah, won't work.
Yeah.
I've had, so I'll go on to another image here. 1 second, sorry, going through these a little bit. I'll come back onto that in a second. So yeah, so from the testing point of view, test. If I look at my portfolio now compared to just 2 years ago, it's miles apart from each other. The quality is hugely different. I went through a period when, about 3 years ago, I started testing properly, doing food and drink. In fact, if you want to have a bit of a giggle, you can go onto my Instagram account. And if you scroll all the way back, I shouldn't tell you this, you scroll all the way back to the beginning of my Instagram feed, you will see what my photography used to be like. Whereas come up to the present day, you know, there's a big difference. And I think one of the things that I did do then with food and drink, with the testing, was that I tested literally, I did a test every week. I'd test on my own, I'd test with people, and I think one of the things that, one of my strengths is actually being able to work with food stylists and prop stylists, because I know how it works, I know how they work, and I know I can look at an image with a prop stylist and we can both sort of go, actually no, we need to move that a bit, and usually 99% of the time I'm on the same page as they are. And that's really important to know. You know your own skills, but also it helps a lot to be able to know the skills of the other people within your team. Because if you know their skills and know what they're capable of, and what, not necessarily what they're capable of, but what's possible in the realms of in a studio and the time that you have. And also that's another thing, that when you're working for clients, you have time constraint. So you might be expected to, if you're doing food and drink, say if you're doing a food shoot, if you're doing a food shoot, which is a branding shoot for a product, then you're probably going to do between 5 and 10 images in a day. 10 is a lot. Usually I'd say it's 6 to 8. But clients are very, very good at turning around in the middle of the shoot and go, oh, well, we could just do this. And you go, we could, but that would be another day. Clients are very quick to turn around and go, oh no, we don't really need to do that. So, which is the same with editing. Clients are very, very good at going, could we have these edited for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? And you go, yes, of course you can have them edited for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, but there will be a rush charge for you for that. Otherwise, you can have them in a week's time for no extra cost. And they'll be like, they'll be fine in a week. That will happen time and time again. And do not be afraid of standing your ground with things like that, because again, it goes back to what I said earlier, is time is money. And the amount of time that you spend on a job and spend on the editing, and don't get me wrong, you should be charging for editing, but if somebody says they want it quicker, you charge them more, because they're basically making their problem your problem. So that's when it should come in a bigger check, basically. I think you'd agree with that whole
Yes, thing. Absolutely.
So test. That's, definitely test. Let me move on to doing these. So I love working with liquids. I love working with liquids, drinks, food, and product as well. So one of the shots we did just before Christmas was this one. And again, it's for an advertising agency for the Trizio. It's a bar snack basically, and we did a hell of a lot in a day. But it was interesting because all the people we used, they didn't use any models. It was just all the people who were on the shoot. And again, this is coming back to being put in a situation where you just got to deal with what you have. And we were in a I think we'd hired out a pub with all these different areas. And again, it was an interesting day because we kept on getting extra images thrown in here and thrown in there. So, but this is one of the stronger ones that came out, which is, again, this is more sort of lifestyle food, but with products as well, and trying to put products into an image so that it's not screaming at you. I think one of my pet hates is when you see product photography and all you see is the product, because it's been shoved so prominently that your eye goes straight to that. And I think a lot of the time with advertising, it's trying to find a bit of a level between the two, if that makes sense. So anyway, so going from this, going back to the studio stuff, the studio work. So again, this is another test that we did, and this was trying to push our boundaries a little bit. And this was just me and an advertising food stylist that I work with, and we'd come up with an idea. Now you see lots of flying food photography around. One of the things that always hits me with most of the stuff that you see is that it looks okay. It doesn't particularly look like you want to eat it, because it just looks like, usually they look like they're sat on a CD or, you know, something like that. So I basically turned around to Dagmar, who's the lady I work with, and said, look, let's try and do something that actually makes you want to eat it. And we came up with this idea. So, and again, this is an interesting one from a client's perspective. So I've had clients call me and say, really like this image, and there's another one that you'll see in a minute, and the flying images, can we do something like that? How many can we do in a day? And I go, well, you'll probably get one done in a day. And then usually you get silence at the end of the phone. And they go, oh, well, we might have to rethink it, but it gives them an idea of what can be done. And again, that goes back to testing, test, because then if I hadn't have done this before, yeah, okay, fair enough, I wouldn't have turned around and said, yes, we could do it without trying it. But because I'd done this, and I knew that this image alone took about 6 hours to shoot, editing wise, it's about 8 hours editing. I think out of all of the images, in this image, there is about 12 images. So
yeah, Katarina's asking how you did it. So if you shot it similarly like this, like in the studio, or is it all Photoshop work?
If I'd have to kill you if I told you.
Yeah. Okay. So we know.
No,
so
we
we just can't reveal this.
I can tell you. I can't tell you exactly how I did it, because I've been told not to by the lady I worked with. It's quite obvious to, you know, the way we did it is with fishing wires, but there's certain things that we did which are a bit different to how it's usually done, which I'm not going to talk about, unfortunately. But you could probably guess.
That's fine. That's fine. You're absolutely allowed to keep some trading secrets. Yeah, that's fine.
One of the things that I would say is that with food and drink, with food photography in particular, remember, food is how's the best way to put this? Basically, shadows and light. So shadows and light. The way I could turn all the levels down on this image, and it would be a lot more dull, and it wouldn't have that sparkly sort of, I want to eat it. I showed this to a client, to a potential client, and he's an art director, and he's somebody that I am very, he's somebody who's like up there, and I've got a lot of respect for, and he just looked at this image and went, he said, I just want to grab it, I want to close it, and I want to take a big bite. And to me, that's like job done. You know, I've made somebody want to eat one of my images. If I know that I'm making somebody hungry, I'm happy. So, but yeah, I think one of the other things to look at with this image is that the drip, that one drip gives it life and gives it movement. Again, talking to somebody recently from a big company, who they had done lots of research on what makes people want to buy their food in images. And one of the things that came out was movement. So movement in an image will have, he gave me a percentage, and it was like 35% more, it will make 35% more people want to buy that product because of the movement, because you're bringing the real life to it, which is, I found that an interesting stat.
It's really true. I mean, when you, this is amazing, really. If you, like, you know, in the burger picture, you know, if you cover with your finger, you know, this old trick with your thumb, if you cover certain parts and your brain fills in the gaps, and it's almost like as if you have completely forgotten about this lovely egg yolk dripping down the burger. So your mind really just fits in that spot. And if you do this, it's right. I mean, it's just a tiny little detail, but the image isn't half as good. It is about that egg yolk. It's absolutely true, really.
Yeah,
That gives it this kind of feeling.
If you do take that off, suddenly it's a static image.
Hmm.
And again, if you have a look on Pinterest and Google flying photography, you'll see a lot of the stuff. It's just got no movement there, so it just doesn't look very appetizing. Yeah. But again, like this image, what I was saying about the light and the dark, one of the key things with food photography is if you go in and lighten up all the light areas and you darken down, this is one of the trade secrets, but darken down all of the shadowed areas, straight away you make something look succulent.
Yeah,
and by
Katerina Katerina is asking about the tonality of the image. Yeah, I think she's also referring to the fact that the egg yolk is yellow and really stands out. Yeah. Whereas let's say like the meat and the toasted bread is a little bit further pushed into the background. Yeah. Yeah, true. Oh, that's very clever. Yeah.
So that was this, and then we did this one for, again, it was another test, and I did this with another friend of ours, a food stylist who's an advertising food stylist. Again, we wanted to do something which looked like you wanted to eat it. And the flying food, it works again. Again, with this, it's the drips, and it just makes it. We actually tried to do something where it actually looks like it's flying up, but again, it just doesn't have the same impact. And like this image is, each of those drops is a separate image. So we basically, the way that you shoot this, and you shoot the last one, and a lot of the studio, the food stuff you do, there's anything with splashes, is that you get the deck, you shoot the deck, you shoot the plate, then you shoot the next element. One of the things that you tend to find a lot of people go, well, why don't you just shoot each of the pancakes individually and then put them all in? If you do that, you're going to create a hell of a lot more work for yourself in editing, because you won't get the natural shadows, which is created by the pancakes being on top of each other, like this. And I've had a few people say to me, why don't you just do it like that? And it's like, well, if you want to spend a hell of a lot longer on Photoshop, then do that. I'm a big believer that with studio work, you do as much of the work in set than in Photoshop, even on something like this, because what will take you 5 minutes on set could take you an hour in Photoshop, and that's something to bear in mind. Clients are very, very good at turning around mid-shoot and going, oh, well, you can sort that in Photoshop. And you go, well, I'll tell you what, I can sort that in Photoshop and charge you an hour for doing it, or we can just do it in 5 minutes now. They tend to say, we'll do it in 5 minutes now. And I think one of the things with photographers in the day and age of digital is it makes photographers very lazy. And I don't think you should be lazy when you're shooting. You should never be lazy when you're shooting anyway, but you should never come from the thought process of, oh, well, we can do that in Photoshop, because there's that whole grey area of when does it stop being photography and when is it digital? Do you know what I mean? From that side of things. So yeah, do as much on set as you can. So that brings me on to the drink stuff as well. The drinks photography, again, drinks, if you have the right team of people, can be quite easy to shoot. I love shooting drinks, and I think the drinks industry is an industry which will always have a lot of money. I've had copious amounts of conversations with people who work in the drinks industry and say to me, specialise in drinks. The drinks industry will always have money, a lot more money. There's a lot more money in drinks than there is in the food industry. And also drinks photography tends to be a lot harder. So if you can specialise in drinks and be good at it, the chances are you'll be busy. So, excuse me. Again, looking at drinks and trying to do things a little bit differently. Like this was a test where we got in touch with the the company and said, look, can we have some of your product? And you can use the images that we do on social media. It's a really good way to get your work in front of brands that wouldn't necessarily look at your work in the first place. If you like a brand, so for example, anybody, it could be somebody like Smirnoff. So Smirnoff are a huge company. They'll have agencies who will create all their work for them, but you could always get in touch with them and go, actually, I'd really like to shoot your work, your product. Could you send me a bottle? And you could use them in your social media if you want to. It doesn't cost them anything. Cost them a bottle, which would cost them next to nothing, and they get some free imagery for it. Now, there's a few people in the industry which would be a bit like, should you be doing that because you're giving work away for free? I personally think that we all start somewhere. When I worked in the music industry, I used to shoot club nights for free because it was the only way I could build a portfolio. And I think you hear a lot of photographers sort of go, oh, you shouldn't be working for free. Well, do you know what? Sometimes I think it can be, as long as people don't take the piss with you, it can be worth it. And you've just got to make sure that you stand your ground as well. So, and know that you're getting something out of it, which is worthwhile. And I think it's at the point when you start doing something for free for a company, when you're not getting something out of it, then it's not working. Don't do it.
That's true. No? So, sometimes the payment doesn't come in pounds.
No.
In that currency, sometimes the payment comes in a different currency.
It does.
Exposure.
I get people getting in contact with me saying, oh, well, if you shoot this, we'll put it on our Instagram and you'll get 1,000 likes. No, don't bother. I think going on to Instagram for a second. So Instagram, my Instagram feed, I've got 1,400, 1,500 followers. I get a lot of people saying, why haven't you got more followers? And I'm like, I'm not interested. From my point of view, as a career, Instagram is very useful for me as a tool. And the way I use Instagram is that I follow people in my industry. I say hello to people in my industry. I get them to follow me back. So not most of the people, but a lot of the people that follow me, they're all art directors, they're agencies, they're, stylists. So it's networking, and you should use Instagram as a networking tool. It's not just a tool to put your nice pictures out there and try and get 30,000 followers, because I think one of the things that we will find in the next few years is that the whole getting work because as an influencer because you've got 30,000 followers is going to die, and I think that will die a death in the next 5 years. Whereas I think if you can carry on doing the proper footwork that you need to do as a photographer, which whatever industry you're in, and it's basically networking. I think LinkedIn and for me, LinkedIn and Instagram are the two really powerful tools. I find Instagram is very good because you can message people directly on Instagram, and on Instagram it's more of a personal level because you don't feel like you're working when you're on Instagram. Whereas when somebody sends you an email and you open an email and it's somebody trying to get work through an email, it's like, oh, I'm working on, I don't want to do this now. So I've got some very good meetings through Instagram, and that's something to bear in mind. So the drinks side of things is actually it's pushed my career forward in a few ways. One way which I wasn't expecting, which was I got phone call about 3 or 4 weeks ago from an agent asking if I'd like to be represented. Now, going on to agents can be amazing. I think I've been mentored by now a friend of mine, Philip, who is an advertising photographer in the sports world, and he's got 4 agents, and I've spoken to him quite a bit about getting agents, and before that I'd actually emailed loads of agents and not really had much back. And one of the things that he said to me was, if you ever get approached by an agent, is make sure you get on with them. You've got to get on with them because you'll be spending a lot of time on the phone with them, and you've got to make sure that you're on the same sort of level with where you want to go with your career and where they want you to go with your career. And also with regards to getting work. An agent has got to be good at getting work. Not all agents are good at getting work. I know people who had agents and not got any work at all. Yeah, so agents wise, agents are good, but I think you've got to be in the right part of your career for it to be right for you, and also be right for somebody to take you on as well. So he's actually predominantly taken me on for my drinks photography, which takes me to all of this work. One of the things that he said when he walked into the studio, he turned around to me and said, "Oh, so what equipment do you use?" And I sort of looked at him and went, "Well, I use a Canon EOS 5D." And he went, "Yeah, but what do you use for your splash photography?" And I went, "Yeah, Canon EOS 5D." He nearly fell off the chair. He was like, "Really? That's what?" And he's like, "If you're getting this sort of work from using that," he's like, "that's amazing." And I was like, "Why?" But that's just the camera I use. Whereas he's used to working. I won't mention names, but he works for a very high-end drinks photographer, and who had equipment which was 20, 30, 40 grand cameras, and he wasn't expecting me to turn around and say that I was using that and a couple of heads, which they're not particularly strong, they're not particularly expensive lighting rigs that I've got here, but it works. And again, it goes back to, you've got to know your equipment and you've got to know how to use it, and if you can do that, then so be it. So yes, this brings me to this really. This is all my drink stuff. Again, with the drinks photography, it really helps to have a good prop stylist, because that really makes it. I keep going on about prop stylists and food and drink stylists, but it boils down to having the right team around you, and also the team that you get on with as well. I've worked with stylists before who we've just not clicked. I've got a certain sense of humour, which I know what I'm like in the studio, and if you don't get me, it ain't going to work. And I think I've actually worked on jobs before where there's been a stylist, and there was one in particular where there was about 9 of us doing this shoot, and there was me, there was an assistant, there was a food stylist, prop stylist, there was the agency's client, so there were about 9 of us, and the stylist actually ended up having lunch on her own at a different table downstairs, and we were like, "No, come and join us," and she was like, "No," and the client turned around to me then and went, "Well, we won't be using them again." And I think one of the things about being a photographer, if you're going to do this sort of photography and working in studios, one of the main things that you have to do, besides from doing good photography, is you've got to be good at people. And if you're not good at people, you're going to be in trouble. Because one of the main things that I tend to find myself doing is I might have an agency here who's got their client here, and there might be a PR company here as well. And you've basically got 3 different elements, and you've got those 3 elements of people who are actually wanting slightly different things. And trying to manage that is basically people management, and that's really important to be able to do that. So yeah, I think it's bringing me towards the end of the talk. I think. How's it been so far for you guys?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I can ask this question towards the group, towards the attendees. Yeah, what I personally find incredibly fascinating is the stylistic curve. Yeah, there was a point, roughly halfway through the presentation, where in your food photography I could exactly still see your clubbing photographs. Yeah. Maybe it's just because we had just seen them 5 minutes ago. But it's so interesting. There's never anything in life basically that would be wasted. Yeah, every experience is an important one, and ultimately it's about joining all those threads together to create your style. I guess. No,
I think one of the hindsight is an amazing thing. If we could have had hindsight at the beginning of our careers, who know where we'd all be. But I think one of the things is being a freelancer it's a journey, and it's a journey which I think the sooner you embrace it and actually start to enjoy it, the sooner you'll start to really love what you do. I think being freelance is peaks and troughs. I remember when I'd started working in the music industry, I'd given up my job, my nice paycheck that I used to get every month, and I knew what I'd get. Given that up, and I was living with my partner, and I've been with her for about a year and a bit. And I was sat on the sofa in the lounge, and I was sat there going, shit, I have no work, I cannot pay the bills, I do not know what to do. And I was at that point, and they say that if you can run your own business as a freelancer and last longer than, I think, 18 months, the chances are you'll be fine. People tend to fall before that. But I remember sitting there and being as low as you can get, thinking, do you know what, I'm going to have to get another job in a shop. And I got a phone call from a magazine saying, would you go to Ibiza for a week on a shoot? And I remember that, and it was a pivotal part of my career where I suddenly went, do you know what, this can be really shit, but at the same time, it can be amazing. And at that point, I was like, I can deal with this. And I think you've also got to be a big believer that money will come in, and it will. If you work hard enough and you push all the right buttons and you network and you never burn a bridge, then that's a big thing. Never burn your bridges with people. You might fall out with people, but you never know where they'll be in 10 years' time. They could be working for an advertising agency, and they might give you a call and go, can you do a big job?
Yeah, true. Amazing. We get lots of great feedbacks from amazing comments about your t-shirt, to people who are really interested in how many people are being involved here, on a food shoot like this, and what I particularly really found really interesting is this creative journey, because it all seems to make sense. I think, the kind of looking at this all, it's almost like puzzle pieces coming together. Super. So thank you so much for this. It's Friday evening, so I hope the rest of the team here is going to have an enjoyable evening as far as that is possible at the moment.